Shalom, my name is Rabbi Lauren Tuchman, and I am so honored that you have chose to be with me tonight as I explore with you allyship as a spiritual practice. This lecture is going to be rooted in my essay that was published in a compilation called Chaver Up, which was compiled and edited by Rabbis Sharon Kleinbaum and Mike Moskowitz of Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in Manhattan. And my essay was entitled From Avdut to Cherut, Spiritual Reflections on Allyship as a Spiritual Practice. And we're going to be describing and discussing some of that today through an exploration of some of the main themes in that essay. One of the things that I discuss there is the idea that Judaism is not, despite the fact that, of course, it is now Shavuot and we have reached a mountaintop moment, we are not inherently a mountaintop tradition. And what I mean by that is that Jewish spirituality is extraordinarily mundane and meant to be part of our daily lives. So often in our American context, when we think of the word mundane, we tend to think of it as in opposition to sacred, right? We have the separation during Havdalah, Bein Kodesh L'Chol, between the sacred and the mundane. And this notion of mundane, it feels like a lesser thing than the sacred. But what I am doing here when I use the term mundane to refer to Jewish spirituality is to say that our spirituality is a spirituality of the everyday and of the every moment. Judaism is a tradition, and we are a people that is rooted in the idea that we are connected to that which is greater than we are from the moment we get up in the morning when we say Moda Ani Lefanecha until the moment we go to sleep when we say Shema Al Mitah, the bedtime Shema, and everything in between. Judaism provides us with portals for ritual connection and spiritual connection. We have these mountaintop moments like Shavuot, which the liturgy calls Man Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of the Torah. But for most of the year, ours is a spirituality that really accompanies us every single day. And we journey, like we are journeying now, through the 7 weeks of Sfirat HaOmer until we reach Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, the time that we received the Torah. In this compilation of essays about allyship as spiritual practice, there are a variety of angles explored. What does allyship mean? What does spiritual practice mean? How do I actually live this out? And so I want to talk about that a little bit abstractly at first, but then really bring it down to the everyday. What exactly do I mean by a lot of the concepts that I address? So one of the main areas of focus that I have is thinking about allyship as profoundly internal. In our cultural context in the United States, which is where I am talking from, we think of allyship as external largely. If I'm an ally, that means that I am in relationship with a group or an individual who has a social position that is different than mine, and often it comes with more oppression and less privilege. If we're going to use the language of privilege and oppression to describe social, economic, and other structural positions. So to put that another way, if I'm someone who came from a middle to upper middle class family and had a lot of resources and had a lot of access to education, if I want to be an ally to somebody who is of a lower socioeconomic background, then that becomes external. How do I move my money in a particular way? What are the things that I can support? Those things turn me into an ally, according to how we tend to culturally view these things. Ally then becomes a title to say, I'm an ally to such and such community, rather than a part of how we operate in the world. And what I am arguing in my essay is, in fact, allyship is about transforming ourselves to transform the world. And I'm deeply indebted in that work to my teacher, Rabbi David Jaffe of the Inside Out Wisdom and Action Project, who wrote a book called Changing the World from the Inside Out, in which he uses Mussar, or Jewish spiritual and moral development, and the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav as a way of helping those who are engaged in social justice activism to think about how they can do their activism from a place of deeply authentic Jewish roots and a place of longevity, to avoid burnout, to avoid frustration. How do we resource ourselves so that we can resource others and the world? So allyship then becomes about thinking about ourselves in our relationship with where we are, with our relationship to place and our relationship to the minutia within that. So there is no single social positioning that any given group might have, but there are larger structural positionings that apply to groups of people. That is how we often think about allyship and often how we think about moving the needle so that we have a more socially just world. So I want to put that a little bit differently. There are many different people who live with various identities or perspectives or whatever term we want to use. So I'll use myself as an example of that. I am an Ashkenazi Jew. I am a person who has class privilege. I am also a person who is blind, so I experience discrimination based on disability, what we often refer to as ableism, ableism being the term to refer to disability-related discrimination. And I got started in the work of thinking about allyship because I started to experience on a very personal level allyship done really well and allyship done really poorly. And that was ultimately the impetus behind me writing the essay that I wrote. And that is why I am very passionate about allyship as an internal and not an external only process. So I want to put that another way. In our tradition, in the Jewish tradition, we have an idea of kavod habriot. Kavod habriot means human dignity. That's one way to translate it. It also is dignity of creations or of creatures, to put it in a much more literal context. So when I think about kavod habriot and the kind of world that I want to live in which kavod habriot is central, I note and name that we are not there, unfortunately, for so many reasons. We are not at that place. And I also know that there are so many ways in which every day there are actions taken that do uphold the dignity of human beings, both on a small scale and on a much larger scale. So when we think about allyship and connecting it to human dignity and human worth, it's very, very easy to externalize and to say, I'm an ally. And by saying that I am an ally, I get rewarded for that in one way or another. Whether it's that my ego feels good because look at all the good that I'm doing, whether it's that I use my social media to talk about my allyship, whether it is that I talk about my allyship to other people, whatever it is, allyship has become in some ways a way for us to feel rewarded because we are standing in solidarity with those who do not experience the life position and social position that we have. And I'm very interested in changing that paradigm and instead saying, how do I look at my own positioning and become an ally as an avodah, as an act of service to that which is greater than I am? And by so doing, I don't do it for the external validation of look at what a good person I am. I do it because I want to uphold a sacred container in which I truly live out the idea that kavod habriot, human dignity, is central to who I am as a Jew and absolutely sacred without question. That every human being is created, as we learn in Genesis, in the image of God. And because every human being is created in the image of God, we need to encounter people with as much kavod, as much respect and honor as we can. But our tradition also realizes that this is aspirational in so many ways. We are living in a profoundly broken world in which violence is with us in so many ways. And many of our hearts are really broken up right now. And many of us wonder, how am I supposed to actually live out this nice and abstract idea of being a good ally to people when my heart is shattered, when I don't know if I'm going to be received with the same kind of kavod that I am extending, when I don't know if I'm going to be received the way that I'm trying to put myself out into the world. I think ultimately what it boils down to is allyship as a spiritual practice is about making a conceited effort for ourselves and for all of those whom we interact with to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And when we feel like our bandwidth is just not capable of holding that, and when we feel like we just cannot do this work anymore, we take a step back and we look within and we figure out what is mine to hold and what is not mine to hold. In what ways am I externalizing or performing allyship because I'm seeking something outside of myself? I'm seeking validation. I'm seeking approval. I want to be liked by certain people. I want to be respected by certain people. I want to be on the right side of X, Y, or Z issue. Instead, when we think about what does it mean to be an ally, how do I live out my tradition's ethical teachings about the sacredness of every human life? And part of that work is learning about equitable partnership. And I'll give a few examples of this that I don't address directly in the essay for reasons of space constraints, but I'm very grateful to be able to address tonight. So as I said a few moments ago, I became very interested in the topic of allyship and thinking about it from a spiritual perspective, not only because I'm a rabbi, not only because I am very committed to Jewish spiritual practice in my personal and professional life, but also because I am someone who, as I said earlier, has a visible disability. I am blind. And because of that, I have been, throughout my life, able to get a sense of how people interact and how people think about people who are very different than themselves. I am often the only blind person in spaces that I'm in. I am often in positions of feeling like I have to speak for the blind community, although that is not as frequent now, but there were certainly times in my life when that felt much more acute. But either way, when you are experiencing life from a different perspective, you get a really interesting sense on how that is understood by other people. And I have encountered in my own experience a lot of very, very well-meaning people who are wanting to improve the lives of people with disabilities and want to be really good allies and be in solidarity with us, and really not only solidarity, but actually active partnership. And that's what I'm really interested in, is active and equitable partnership. And I've also experienced people who think about disability rights as a cause that they can champion without actually doing the inner work of what does it mean to show up? What does it mean to actually put my feet on the ground and to follow the lead of those on the ground who know their lives, know their experiences better than I ever can? It does not mean, and I want to be very clear, that we abdicate our own informed understandings. It doesn't mean that I don't ask questions if I don't follow something. It doesn't mean that I am not using every faculty that Hashem gave me of the ability to think critically, act critically, and examine situations. It is not to say that our perspectives are unimportant. What it is to say is the Mussar idea of no more than my space and no less than my place. So we are not asked to cede our space entirely so that other people can come in exclusively. Rather, what we are being asked to do is take no more than our place and no less than our space. We are all created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And there are times when I need to take a step back so that I can become a more informed and educated person and be in right relationship with people who are experiencing any number of challenge. And there are times when my own expertise, my own lived experience is actually really important, and I need to bring that in. And in those moments when I am stepping back, it is not because I should completely disappear. It's rather because I understand that there is what that is mine to hold, and there is what that is not mine to hold. And I think many of us, from a very well-meaning perspective, really want to be helping, want to be doing a lot of good work in the world, and think, I have these resources and I have this access, and here's a really great way to solve this problem. I find a problem, I really want to be in solidarity with folks experiencing it. How can I help them solve that problem? Allyship as spiritual practice, in my view, is taking that very well-meaning impulse and channeling it appropriately. We're not making a moral judgment. Oh, you shouldn't think that way. That's not appropriate. You are overstepping your bounds. Instead, what we do is, in an act of mindful noticing, we notice that arises. Oh, I have all these resources. Here are some ways that this person could solve this problem. Have they thought of this? Have they thought of this? Have you thought of that particular kind of assistive technology? Have you thought of this other kind of assistive technology to help you with X, Y, and Z accessibility challenge? I notice that thought arising. I name it internally. I may not want to externalize this, and I would recommend that this is an internal practice and not an external one. And then I say, okay, I believe that every single person is created b'tselem Elohim. Human dignity is universally important. And these people that I'm in relationship with, if I, for example, am somebody without a disability in relationship with people with disabilities, have a lot of lived experience. How can I be part of working with them in the way that is most empowering and following their lead to partner in creating a better world for us all? Instead of assuming that because of my own sociological positioning in a given cultural context, that I have all of the answers. And it's very, very hard to get there because our culture tells us in a lot of subconscious, subliminal ways that we don't even notice until we really step back and start to think about them. That for many of us who are listening and watching this shiur tonight, many of us received the message in one way or another. You are so fortunate. Look at everything you have. Look at all of the inequity and inequality in the world. Go and help. Go and do the good service that you need to do so that you can use all of the goodness and all of the bracha that you have been given, all of the goodness and blessing that you have been given, to make sure that others experience that as well. And there is so much to laud in that idea. Service is so important. Being there, showing up in the ways that we can is so, so important. It is a part of the puzzle that until we live in a fully redeemed world in which everything and everyone has what they need, and we live in an equitable world, we need that. That is critically important, and it is a part of social change. And to add to that, the idea of allyship as spiritual practice is saying, okay, service is needed. It is not enough. How can I be in right relationship so that I can work to undo a lot of the structural inequities that exist that then result in the inequities that we experience in this society? And all the more so, how do I look within myself? How do I listen for that call to mamadaka, that still small voice? How do I get really, really quiet, really quiet, and start to listen deeply to the voice of my own neshama, of my own heart and soul, my own lev, my own neshama, so that I can be guided, so I can keep vain, bibi, I can move my heart, I can intend my heart in the right direction in a way that will allow me to then be in the world in a much more aligned way. And I think we have adopted a very binary approach, and that's what I'm trying to help us unpack a little bit. That if I want to be in allyship with someone else, I have to get rid of my own self. I have to do tzimtzum. I have to do contraction. Kabbalists talk about expansion and contraction. Tzimtzum is that contraction, and I have to do that in order to do good work. I have to put aside myself. And in fact, what I'm suggesting is that when we do that internal examination, we are not putting aside ourselves because we feel, oh, well, look at how much I have. I need to feel apologetic for that, or I need to, whatever it is going through our mind. And a lot of us have felt those things. Rather, what we are saying is, my reality is this. I really want to build a world that is more redeemed than the one that we are living in. And we know all too well that the world that we are living in is far from redeemed. And this is something that I face every day, and all of us face every day. So I recognize my reality, I recognize where I am, and then I work together with others to build that world, recognizing that I am as much a part of it as anybody else is. That all of our experiences as human beings are integral to this planet and to who we are as a community, and that we are all infinitely precious to Hashem, to God. So we do that through true and genuine, humble partnership. Humble meaning that I know that I know, and I know that I don't know. I know that there are many things in this world that I understand. I know that there are so many things I don't, and I seek to learn and grow to be a better human being. And I navigate my own feelings productively by not ignoring them, but by, as the Piasetzner Rebbe talks about in a lot of his writings, the Piasetzner Rebbe is also known as the Warsaw Ghetto rabbi, which is only talking about a very small portion of the work that he did. He wrote many, many books of Jewish spirituality. He was the rabbi of a small town in Poland before the Ghetto. Unfortunately, he was murdered in Auschwitz in 1943. And he talks a lot in his work really about getting clear about what our feelings are, because if we ignore them, he talks about this specifically in a work that he wrote called B'nai Machshava Tova, which has had a variety of translations, but one way could be understood as the conscious community, or another way to translate that more literally are people of good thoughts. But actually, it's a book that is really a spiritual guide for how to create a very intentional community. And there's a particular chapter in that book, chapter Yud Aleph, chapter 11, where he talks very directly about what do we do with our feelings. If we are feeling particularly strongly about something, we might try to tamp that down externally. And he gives examples of, we might want something to drink, we might want to take a nap, we might want to eat something. Think about how many times you've been in a situation where you're feeling particularly wound up about something, really, really frustrated. I think all of us tonight can imagine that, have been there, have absolutely felt that over the past year and a half and over the past many years before that. We can all think of an example of just feeling completely wound up and I just don't know what to do. And what do I do with these feelings? I can externalize them. I can make them go away by taking them and numbing them a little bit. Maybe I do that with the internet, with Netflix, whatever it is. But the Piasetzner reminds us that if we are only numbing our feelings, they're going to come back. We're not taking care of them because that is our soul crying out for attention. That is our neshama asking us to stop and pay attention. And that is true in allyship as well. Because anyone who is engaged in any kind of social justice work knows very well that it is extraordinarily difficult work. There are lots of competing needs. There are many people with very strong views on any number of issues, and it can often feel like we just don't have a place. What if we don't feel like we fit here, we fit there? We want to be good allies and build a better world. So we got to find a way to fit into this box. And what I'm actually suggesting is that if we are able to feel ownership of our own feelings, have those safe containers to work with them, we can then show up in the world much more aligned, because we know that we need no more than our place and no less than our space. What is ours to hold and what is not ours to hold? What are the pieces of the large puzzle of human social transformation that we all yearn for that I can play a part in? And how do I trust? How do I have the BetaHun? How do I have the trust that other people will carry what they can when there is so much proof to the contrary? And this is something that I have to work on all the time, because I am someone for whom it is very easy to fall into a pessimistic place and say, we're not moving on anything. Especially during the pandemic, things have felt so fraught. So many people have been left behind. There's so much broken. And I have to remember, and we must remember, that so much of this work takes place out of the public view. Despite the fact we live in a world where media is omnipresent, so much of what we experience happens out of the public view and happens in those relational one-on-one contexts. And I want to now continue with a conversation about BetaHun, which is an area that I address in the essay directly. And BetaHun is often translated as trust. But I would say that trust is an imperfect or imprecise translation. So the Hebrew root betach definitely is related to security and is related to trust in the way that we think about that. But BetaHun, as a larger spiritual idea, is not about saying, okay, I am going to give up my own sense of thinking and self, and I am going to put trust in everything that's greater because ultimately things will work out. This is not a passive approach. We Jews are not known for sitting back and letting the world go by. We are go-getters. We don't love the status quo as it is. So much of our tradition is all about working against how the world is to build the world as it should be. Shabbat is one example of that. We work for 6 days at our labors, and we have a 7th day Shabbat of rest, where we don't engage traditionally in creative labor because of the idea not only related to the building of the Mishkan or the sanctuary in the desert, but also it's very much about tasting redemption, tasting a world that is different than the world we live in the other 6 days of the week. BetaHun is similar in that. BetaHun does not ask us to say, oh, I've done all I can and God will provide. BetaHun says, I am doing what I can. As it says in Pirkei Avot, we cannot desist from we may not finish the work, but we must never desist from it. But BetaHun is instead saying, I must cultivate the trust that I am part of a larger puzzle. And that even and especially when it's going to take a long time, and I can tell you this is something that I deeply struggle with, even and especially when social change is going to take a very, very, very long time. And I may not be alive to experience the fruit of my labor. I trust that we are flowing and moving towards transformation, and I do all that I can in my own dalaramot, in my own sphere, to move us there. I don't cease from my own work. I trust that we are part of a larger story, and I know that my own voice, my own self is part of that larger story. It's the humility of knowing that I know what I know and can experience what I can experience, but cannot truly understand the entirety of the picture from my own vantage point. but I never stop working for a better world. And that ultimately is what allyship is, a spiritual practice. Allyship is encountering other people with profound humility, and humility in a way that is not about denial, but about genuinely wanting to get to know and understand others and form meaningful connections. This takes a really, really long time. We live in a culture that is so, in my view, so focused on wokeness. I have to say the right words, I have to read the right books, I have to hear the right speakers, that we are ignoring and neglecting all of those who don't fit what we think of as the right voice, the right speaker. And I'll use this again, myself as an example. I have a very particular perspective as a woman who is blind. I do not speak for the blind community, I speak for myself. Because I'm a rabbi, I have a platform, and I'm very conscious of that. So when I'm using my platform, I always say, I do not speak for the blind community. I have very particular experiences, very particular access points, very particular desires and interests that put me in a unique social position, and other people who are blind are going to have very different perspectives. Their voices are no less valid than mine. When I am thinking about disability rights and disability allyship, of course, do I want people to understand my perspective? Absolutely, I want people to understand my perspective because we all have ego. This is not about saying we don't have ego. We have ego. Our tradition realizes that. We are human. We are human beings and we have ego and we want to be heard, right? We want to be heard. We want to be understood. But we also, and I also know that my perspective is not the only perspective. And when I can feel grounded in that, I can feel a lot less threatened when another blind person says, no, in fact, I don't agree with that. I think of things a different way. And so that's where I really want to leave us, is thinking about allyship as creating that container where I'm able to work on myself such that I can show up in the work that I do externally, feeling much more aligned and connected. I think that this work is really important to do in relationship with an accountability partner, in relationship with a spiritual practice, whether it's meditation, whether it's prayer, whether it's singing, nigun, whatever it is, journaling. But we are not meant to do this work alone. We are in community. Ours is a tradition that is very focused on community. And as we are at this mountaintop moment where we are receiving Torah, we are receiving Torah with so much joy and so much humility, knowing that every day and every year, the Torah reveals more and more to us. And so too, every day and every year, our understandings of self and the other change. And that truly is how we do allyship as an avodah, as a service, as an avodat Hashem, as a spiritual practice. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful Chag. Chag Shavuot Sameach. May you learn much Torah. May you receive Torah in all of its fullness. Shalom.